Let's continue with our morning session. Our next speaker is Jinchao from KAUST, and he will talk about the finite neuron method for numerical PDEs.
Okay.
Very excited to learn about this.
Thank you very much, Christine. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Rob, for giving me this opportunity to talk. And today I'm going to talk about some very theoretical issues about using a neural network to solve partial differential equations. And I won't do the stochastic one as Rob did in the previous talk. I'll just do a kind of a simpler PDE model. And anyway, well, which I call the finite neuron method. It's made up a name. So I've been working on finite element mostly, and I'm sure most of you know. But anyway, I just begin something trivial anyway. So the finite element is piecewise polynomials, so it's piecewise linear. And so you do 1D, 2D, 3D, and you give a simplicial partition of the domain. We call it triangulation. And you put a piecewise linear function on the grid. You give a grid first, then you do the functional space. So you do find out the error analysis, and you can prove that if you have n number of degree of freedoms, if you think about the H1 norm in the best approximation is like usually put h to the k's power for polynomial degree k, and you can actually, this is an upper bound, you can actually prove it's a lower bound. And this is something I wrote a paper some years ago. If the function, the solution you approximate is not actually in the subspace, it's actually lower bound, it's optimal. And anyway, this is the finite element kind of theorem. And sorry. And so I'm going to talk about some, say, again, partial differential equation. I put this in any order of any kind of dimension. Of course, the old friend here is Laplacian, and biharmonic functions. So if you do variational in the, you get minimization like this, like the, energy, into bilinear form and all this stuff. And but I'm interested in any order of PDE, any dimension. It's a mathematical game, but we mostly solve second order equation, fourth order equation. I got interested in this one many years ago. What if I just do any dimension, any degree? Can you have some finite element? I actually wrote quite a few papers on this, but today, for example, if you think about conforming element, because this is a super space of all the m can be arbitrarily large. It turns out to construct piecewise polynomials, which is globally smooth in any dimension, is not obvious. And I mean, actually, well, it is not obvious how you construct it. I think recently you can actually construct piecewise polynomials. So for example, in let's say for H2 in 3 dimension, you need a ninth order polynomials in order to be in H2. And in that case, in each element, the degree of freedom is 20. If you go higher, you can get more. But so this is kind of the state of art. This was some kind of question which is in the literature. I did some space method for non-conforming method and all that. But anyway, this is not what I'm going to talk about. But if you actually you find the element, this is difficult. But also one of the main things when you talk about machine learning, they always say this word COD, curse of dimension. And if I'm interested, like say, if you do high order, but also high dimension, okay, it's over 10, 20, 100 dimension of PDEs. Or if you solve stochastic PDE, that's a very high dimension. But in a different way. But here I'm talking about the spatial dimension. It's not the sampling. So the curse of dimension here is like 1 over d. If d is like 100, if you put n elements, as you can see, you don't have much of convergence. And so as I said, high order polynomial, if you do conforming method for eighth order of PDE, actually people use that in like phase field method or stuff, high order method, but you need a very high order polynomials. So all these things somehow when you do neural network functions, somehow you can get around it. You can have some different properties. I'm sure most of us here know what is called deep neural network. If a given you take a linear function, so you compose with a one-dimensional function called activation function. Then I call that one variable x1. So you do linear again, and you composition again. So you do all these things. So you have more layers, you get a deeper neural network functions. So one of the most popular activation function is what we call Relu, and it's for me I like it because it's like finite element, piecewise linear functions. And the interesting thing is that you can also do Relu to the case power, but anyway, so the interesting thing is that if you take a linear function in the one variable, if you compose it into a multivariable linear function, become a multivariable piecewise linear function. If you take a multivariable linear function composed with another piecewise linear function, it's still a piecewise linear function. But the subdomain is polyhedrons. So if you subdivide the polyhedron to simplices, as you can see, deep neural network function with Relu is nothing but a special finite element function. That's how I got into machine learning. Oh, finite element. So deep neural network with Relu is just finite element in my language. Piecewise linear finite element. An interesting question is that if you do Relu to the k, it's a piecewise polynomial. In this case, it's a little bit complex, still piecewise polynomial. Let me see. I have another. I have noticed this, which actually I didn't say. I put, if you notice that I put equality here. Relu DNA is piecewise linear. Now the question is that if you give any arbitrary piecewise linear function for a given mesh, can that be written as a DNA Relu or not? The answer is yes. That's actually not so trivial. So it turns out, as a set of functions, Relu DNA is nothing but identically the same as the piecewise linear polynomial as a finite element. That's the first message I like to give in case you don't know these things. But the thing is that the structures are utterly different. You get the finite element, you have a grid first, right? So you get a piecewise linear function on that grid. Here, I don't have a mesh. You have something called a meshless method. I don't even have a points. I call it pointless method. you don't even have a mesh. So but as a set of functions, they are the same class. So that's kind of makes it interesting. But anyway, but this is the first message I want to say. That's why I think is we have a familiar finite and kind of functional class, but they have very interesting structure. So approximation theory for neural network has been a very kind of interesting subject for the machine learning. And in the machine learning language, they call it representation power something. If you have your model, whether it's rich enough to learn some maybe features of the data function stuff. But how to do the approximation and also how to actually use the neural network for numerical method for partial differential equation. Even though I said that Relu DNA is just a piecewise linear, it's like finite, but they do have very different structures. For one thing is that this is not an even linear space. It's not even a space, it's just set. And I'm actually considering what I call a stable neural network is that if you, this is kind of what we call a shadow neural network. And I'm going to put this coefficients bounded by m. You know, it took us a long time for us to reach to this point. This is something important, which I'm going to come back to that one later. And so I'm going to consider a special kind of neural network function with a kind of stable coefficients, what I call a linear layer outside. This one I call x1. Some other, you know, with activation function. This is a long linear here. And you can actually talk about the general dictionary if you're in the approximation theory, and you work on the dictionary. And so basically, you're given a set of function d, which is a given. So you take all the combination of this dictionary with a bounded coefficients in the L1 sense. And so one of the things that I would go, given a dictionary like the neural network, you consider take all the possible combination, a linear combination from the things in the dictionary. Then I take the closure of a your Banach space X, and take the closure. And this is what we call, it's like you can consider it's like a convex hole, you know, if you think about R equal to 1, if the dictionary is symmetric, the plus or minus 1 is all in there. And this would be what I call pretty much, this defines a ball of radius R in what we call the variation space in this with respect to this dictionary. And this is a very important concept. So B1 is just a convex hole of D. And so here with the variation space, it took us for a while to reach to this point, as mentioned earlier, but it's something which is a statistician actually being used in these things from totally different viewpoints. But so you choose the smallest R such that this norm, this F is in the BR of D. This R is the bound of this linear coefficient L1 on. It turns out, so this is the very important space. We call it K1D, and I think I borrowed the notation from some approximation theorem literature. And we can prove this is a Banach space. And so why am I interested in this space? The question is that approximation theory. And so you take a function L2. Now the question is that how can you say, if you take a function L2, and under which condition you need some regularity of this function f, such that it's kind of in norm, in this L2 norm, it's like this thing is like dense. You know, you can approximate by this shallow neural net with bounded coefficients. Okay. I can spend hours talking about approximation theorem, but here we can just have one simple question. So here you go. You need some regularity. It's like but of course, if you think about a kind of quantitative convergence, you don't need any regularity. Any function of any, let's say L2, can be approximately neural network functions, as long as the sigma is not a polynomial. This is one of the basic results. But I'm actually talking about the bounded coefficients is important. Okay, this is things in bounded coefficients. In this case, we actually identified if and only if this f should be in this K1D. And we like this results very much. Very simple. This is if and only if. Actually, once you actually get that, if you have a qualitative convergence, I can get this qualitative convergence like this. You get a norm in terms of, okay. This n to the negative half is you can see in the Monte Carlo type of method, and yeah, and this is about sampling argument. You know, it's interesting that even you do this approximation theorem, you can do sampling argument. So this is a very generic theorem. This is for recently we actually pushed these things a little bit. And if you do the Relu to the kth power, you can gain some extra power. We can actually prove that this is the work I did. Actually, in the approximation theorem, even in this statistician, statistic kind of literature, approximation literature, there's a, you know, some people call this kind of Byron norm, Byron kind of, I mean, they did this n to the negative half. They have, but usually only get n to the negative half. But how right now we can get some extra power, but this extra power is not a big deal, but it's kind of mathematically interesting. What n to the negative half is not the best estimate you can get. You can get some higher order, but you can actually prove, it's a lower bound. This kind of theoretical results. That's how actually this is a problem. Has lots of top people working on this business, and there are many open problems. I think we closed lots of gaps recently. And anyway, the short message is that if you go from this bounded kind of neural network, there's a reason you need to be bounded in the sense that, but anyway, I probably shouldn't get into that very much. I'll make some comments some more later. If you want to have a bounded neural network, if you do the sampling, by the way, if you do the sampling, the coefficient is 1 over n, you know, if you do the sampling. If you sum this 1 over n is equal to 1, but it's always a constant. If you do sampling argument, it's always bounded. Okay. And so it's a generalization of the sampling kind of things. And any argument based on sampling argument, it should be in this space. And so you can get a higher order. So we have very good understanding of this approximation property. Suppose if you remove that guy, I don't want to do sampling, but do some more sophisticated things. This kind of gets interesting. If you so if you take only n to the negative half, if you do all these things, it turns out I can put the s equal to half here. If you work hard, if you look at this Byron type of estimate, s equal to 1, okay, and the best even s equal to 2 actually, but we can actually go bring all the way down to s half. And the most interesting thing that if I can increase my s to be as large, allow me to depend on the dimension, then I can have an estimate is independent of the dimension here, the exponent. But there are lots of things hidden in this big norm there. This s will depend on the dimension, but it depends on what game you play. But the things that I want to show is that the most remarkable things I want to show you is that it's the following things. If you really think about quantitative rate of convergence, the finite element, you have number of elements, right? Here I have number of coefficients. Now that's my n. If you do that, I told you before, Relu DNA is just a piece of just finite element. So this is my, think about k equal to 1, okay? This is my finite element this, with n degree of freedom. This is my neural network function, also with n degree of freedom. But the rate of convergence is d power beta. if your function is sufficiently smooth, let's take d equal to 2. Yeah, anyway, so because if you find an element, I told you is optimal. You want to divide by d there, huh, in the exponent. So but for that, none of my finite element colleagues believe these things, because I don't I don't like to see this, because that shows, well, I mean, this deep neural network has very interesting structure. But the thing is that the question is that if this one is realizable, how do you do the optimization problem, like gradient descent, as I see the previous talk, and do the optimization? That's a different story, but I'm going to come back to that one. So the message here is that you have no cursive dimension, but this word of no cursive dimensionality in deep learning is a very subtle statement, and many people have been claiming that deep learning, deep neural net, has no or less cursive dimensionality. But I have studied this for quite a couple of years right now. I still don't know what that means, actually. If you really think about rigorous mathematics or even empirical evidence. And but I play different game here. If you have even for low dimension, my rate of conversion could be much higher. But of course, it all has to do with how the cost of this. But the machine learning is notoriously expensive. And but at this stage of the game, we don't care about the cost. You can run my GPU. It's one of the reasons I come here. You have lots of GPUs here, but it takes several weeks to get train your neural network. But if you're low dimension, you can still get a high order convergence. Okay, but anyway, there's something with high dimension. One of the favorite things people do is sparse grid. Okay, sparse grid has this. I actually play with the sparse grid. I'm going to compare with, you have the sparse grid. But as the main conclusion I want to make here is, theoretically speaking, this involves some of the embedding theorem, or that sort of things, depend on. And the shallow neural network, theoretically speaking, seems to be potentially better than sparse grid function class without the cursive dimensionality. And sparse grid usually is a logarithm, but you can also get rid of the logarithm. But anyway, I think neural network is kind of a much richer class in some sense, but it's much more nonlinear. And so let's talk about how you're going to do the what I call a finite. Suppose I plug this one into finite element in PDE, and solve this elliptic boundary value problem, which I mentioned before. So what I do right now is I do something totally trivial. Did I tell you earlier that if you do piecewise polynomial for a given grid, it is challenging to construct a piecewise polynomial that has a higher global regularity? If you do a H2 in 3D, you need the ninth order polynomials. But here, what I do is trivial. I'm gonna do this, this Relu to the case power. You take the positive things. It turns out that if k is greater or equal to n, it's automatically in there. Okay, so this is totally trivial conforming. I just get a piecewise polynomial degree k or degree m for Hn. But the thing is that what does it look like if you plot it? So you have this. This is a shallow neural network. It turns out, I don't know. Would you consider this as a triangulation or not? So in 2D, it's all this intersection of some lines. So you do piecewise polynomial, you should want this triangles, quadrilateral, stuff like that. Okay. But you might think, oh, what the heck, if you do this, do you have any approximability or not? But I told you before, if your function is smooth enough, this one has good approximation property. That's actually much better. But it's very strange. Well, if you read the other literature about approximability or representation power of a neural network, I think that people like Benjo, these people wrote papers on that. They would argue that if you do all this intersection of all different lines, the number of subdomains is exponentially many, as you can imagine.
Sorry, can I ask a quick, very basic question?
Yes.
I mean, it seems to me, but maybe I'm wrong, but here, this very peculiar structure would be, I mean, when you talk about finite elements, you choose one grid for all functions that you try to approximate, right? But here, for every particular function, you choose kind of a different, I mean, it's not really a grid, but a different geometry here.
That's a very, very important point. And for a finite element, it's actually a linear space. You're given one grid, it's kind of would approximate a whole bunch of function class. But there's another thing called adaptive finite element. And usually that's only good for smooth functions. If it's for smooth function, this is also quite reasonable. But if for smooth function, you usually have a uniform grid or quasi-uniform grid. For non-smooth function, if you have some corner singularity, you have to refine there. In that case, it's the grid depends on the function as well. The kind of a more advanced, sophisticated finite element, this grid depends on the function to be approximate as well. Here, but that's very great point. But there you do some kind of local grid refinement. Here, what I'm going to come back to later, is has highly adaptive. But the question is, how do you realize this adaptivity is a huge problem. Thank you for asking for this. I don't know if I answer your question. But and so if you do higher dimension, I'm going to do some Neumann problems. And now the question, I'm going to do some analysis. Then we're going to talk about how to solve these things. Okay. If you do these things, this is my loss function. When you usually minimize something, so this is some kind of energy minimization. We're talking about Neumann boundary value problem, but you can do delicately. But so anyway, now the question is that if you don't find a neuron method, I'm going to replace this V, this H of M, by this set of neural network functions. But I'm telling you here is that this is not a linear space. If you add the two neural net functions together, it becomes something else. It's not the same n anymore, like 2n or something. And so you cannot do variational. You cannot do variation. You cannot take the fractional derivative in the discrete space. So you just have to solve this optimization problem. Actually in the beginning, I was very nervous about this problem because how I'm going to do analysis. But it turns out when you dig it in, you can actually find, this volatile lemma best approach. This is still true. This is because of the variable v. This is actually convex with respect to v. It's still quadratic. So this is still true. But it's highly non-convex with the coefficients. If you do that, so you can get this order of convergence. If God knows how to solve this optimization problem, I can get a very high order convergence, which is kind of exponent-wise is independent of the dimension. M is my order. M is the order of the PDE, 2 M's. K is the polynomial, is the Relu to the K's power. It's like piecewise polynomial degree K. But there's lots of story in the big O there. Because I don't know, find it all this. So if you do biharmonic, if a biharmonic multi-element is a piecewise quadratic, it's a non-conforming element. If you do a piecewise quadratic, you get h square. Huh? If you do the k equal to 5, which is a Algarius element, which you do the biharmonic, and if you find a neuron, if you think about it, into the, if you do not care about the cost, just in terms of degree of freedoms, this is what I call a finite neuron method will do much better. Now, these are the things I want you to come back to this. So what it means to reduce the KD? It's piecewise polynomial on some curved element. You can go something like that. And let me go back. You get a best possible error estimate. You cannot do better than this. You can prove, I can prove that you cannot do better than this. If you do piecewise polynomial degree k of any kind. Another thing is very interesting because it's only shallow, yeah. Deeper is even better, but they always say deeper is better, but it's bigger open mathematical problems. I cannot. That's one of the things we need to work on. Deeper. Everybody says deeper is better. I also believe that. But there's another one. Now he's talking about that. This has to do with this. The deeper is better. For k equal to greater equal to 2, if you increase the layers, okay, error is the layer, you can recover all the polynomials of any order. If I get a degree polynomial of 100 order, I can recover that by increase the depth. What do you mean? Yeah, to add more depth. But this has a k greater equal to 2. They have a polynomial. So what does that mean? If I use the DNA, I could do spectral accuracy. But if it's a lower order, I told you, for any grade of any kind, adaptive, locally refined, I can write that finite element on the grid, on that adaptive grid by some neural network. What does that mean? So if God knows how to solve this optimization problem, I'll come back to that later. You can adapt. If it's smooth, I can do polynomial, high order polynomial. If it's not smooth, I can do local measure refinement. If you think about this, it's not so surprising. Well, it's surprising in some way, but if you think about the adaptive finite element, the coordinate of the finite element grids are kind of unknown functions. You have to move the grid point around. But if we don't do the finite element that way. We can also do local measure refinement. That's what we call it, like a greedy algorithm. If you mean it, so you do some local optimization that will be greedy algorithm, which way I'm going to talk about. So you have, if you do a high, this is level 3, I believe. If you do deep neural network, you have some piecewise polynomial degree k and some extremely complex, kind of funny looking elements which have curved boundaries, okay? But you can reproduce polynomial of any order if you increase the depth, okay? But you can also reproduce any grid you want locally. So neural network function is very special. It's highly what I call a multi-level, multi-scale adaptivity. If you want to smooth, I give you polynomial. If you want to be local singularity, I give you locally refined mesh. But the whole story here is that there are many kind of issues here. Let me talk about 2 issues in the rest of the talk. Number one is that how do you do the numerical quadrature? You want to minimize this guy. Sorry, it should be half there. But you want to minimize this what I call a loss function. So loss function, you can think about this as expectation. All right. So if you look at all this finite this neural network of kind of PDE, this sample, It's an expectation. You just expectation is an integral with probability measure, and you just random sampling. That's one special way to compute the numerical quadrature, right? Numerical integration. Monte Carlo is one of the things that people call the Monte Carlo method. And but I've actually got into why do you even sample in 1D? You want to have I don't know if Monte Carlo suppose is a low accuracy into the negative half, but not in the world if I would do a sample in 1 or 2D. But at least you can. But I would do a. That's one thing. Another one is that how do you do the visualization? That's the huge issue here. How do you do the optimization problem? So we can do the convergence, and there's a lot of work in this literature. This is just some sampling algorithm. I can do the sampling of the literature. There's a lot of it. And but I don't know. There are many papers written, but the thing is that you have to make it very rigorous. So we have actually lots of paper in the literature. You just prove. At some point, you cannot prove, just make an assumption. Then you keep going. But I'll give you one example later on. But I'm going to try to do some rigorous mathematics here. And so let's say you do the sampling here, which is somehow this. I don't have this an omega. Instead of omega, this is a unit cube, for example. You there's all kinds of typo here. So there's the 1 away, 2 here. But anyway, you do the sampling, you do uniform random sampling. Okay, you can do this one here. But another one you can think about numerical quadrature, Gaussian. I would not recommend, at least if you do a 1D or 2-dimensional problem, you don't want to do sampling. It's not very accurate. I just do Gaussian, numerical quadrature. Now the question is how to analyze these things. If you let's do the numerical quadrature, this is something. If you go to the finite element textbook, so you want to follow the argument. I'm going to Gaussian. It turns out that you can actually prove that do the analysis as long as this. As long as you can bound some subgroup norms, okay, but both of the things are approximated. But here, my function class is a neural network. Okay, it's very funny. Now the question is that if you do this something called Bernstein inequality, if you play with approximation theorem, Bernstein inequality says that a high order subgroup norm can be bounded by low order subgroup norm with a deteriorating power of n, which you can see that if V is a linear space, if it's a linear space, it's a finite dimension. Any norms in a linear vector space are equivalent. Okay, this is one of the things we study in functional analysis. Any norms in the finite dimensional space are equivalent, but of course it has blown up if the dimension increases. But so there are actually quite a few papers in the literature. Let's just assume that because you cannot prove it. And then if you do that, you can do some analysis. It turns out, I just say, okay, you made the assumptions. What if it doesn't hold? It turns out we actually give a counterexample. Deep neural network function, you cannot control H1 norm by H2 norm, no matter how many power of n you put there. It's just not true. We can, because if you move the grid point around, we'll construct some examples. So that's a bad news. Then so what do we do here? This is a very preliminary result, but at least what I'm going to present is rigorous, I think. Suppose I do the stable neural network. This coefficient has L1 bound. And in that case, if you do all these things, and so you solve this, you do these things. We call it was a K1D. I'm going to constrain in this K1D now, which is you have this. First of all, you have this deep neural network function. I'm actually talking about shallow neural network, and You also think about the function to be approximated is my K1D, which is like in the convex hole kind of closure. And so I'm going to confine, I'm going to assume my function solution of the PDE belongs to this K1D. That requires regularity. And also that the numerical, the neural network is also this bounded coefficients. And if you do that, it turns out that this is a very smooth function. If you take a Relu to the case power, and you can prove this function actually. I told you before that if you have a k, you can take derivative case power for Relu to the case power. You can take one derivative for Relu. Wow, not quite a derivative. We're talking about like a weak derivative. The Relu is Lipschitz. You can take one derivative in the weak sense. Relu to the k, you can take a case order derivative in the weak sense. You can actually prove the WK infinity is bounded. And so if you do that, you can prove for numerical quadrature. If the solution is smooth enough, you can get the rate of convergence. Okay. And if you do these things, if you do, then you can prove the rate of convergence for any order. Okay, this is optimal order. And if the described optimization problem is solved accurately, that's a big if. So that's theoretically, I think, so we can say you can get the best possible estimate, which you can imagine to get. Yes, please. But here, as I said, it's I'm going to come back to that question. Is we actually use a sampling, Monte Carlo. This one is a kind of academic exercise. I have very smooth function to be approximated, and maybe you can ask me a question. You can ask. Wait a minute, I have so many small slides. Hold on a second, I'm not doing very well. But anyway, please come back to me. Okay, let's forget about this proof here. I think the more interesting case is actually the sampling argument. In this case, if you do Monte Carlo, I don't know if you do error estimate, experts here, we actually look up the literature. You can estimate this. In this case, you have to do the expectation, And in this case, it's something kind of bounded by this Rademacher complexity functions, which is defined by 42. And I don't want to get into too much, but this is a very nice piece of work. Somehow we trace all the literature to this paper. I don't know if some of you know better than me on this. I don't know who did this one first. It's a beautiful piece of beautiful results. Okay. Now the question is that if you do the Monte Carlo sampling, you need to estimate this Rademacher complex. And it turns out if you do the deep neural network, we can prove if you took n, no, it's not deep, I'm sorry, shallow neuron with n neurons. No, it's n sampling, I'm sorry. If you do n sampling, but capital N is the number of sampling points, you can prove it's n to the negative half, the Rademacher complexity. In that case, it's not surprising, okay? But you prove the Monte Carlo method has the rate of convergence into the negative half given expectation. It's a stochastic method, but if you have a little n number of neurons, you put it together, you get this estimate. Okay. So that's I don't know if I come back to your question, but I can do a sampling argument for if the this works for high dimension and without asking too much of regularity. There are all kinds of issues. If I ask more questions, I may get lost myself because I just want to be rigorous at each point. And but I'll show you some for smooth function. It's okay. I have my theory. But if you have a singularity in high dimension, then that's getting tough. Theoretically, numerically is also tough. And the optimization algorithm, the whole question is that how do you solve this optimization problem? You know, and the most interesting case is that if you look at all these papers, so PDEs, everybody, most people using gradient descent method, stochastic gradient descent, SGD, for good reason. If you have a stochastic problem to begin with, if you don't know your expectation, my understanding, you know, in machine learning, there's always a God-given distribution there. Oh, you don't know the distribution, so you have to sample. But in numerical PDE, okay, at least in my kind of PDE, I know all the distribution, so I have to sample. But anyway, so I can. But in any case, I have the approximation error. Now the question is, can you, if I increase number of neurons, can you see the asymptotics? When I do numerical method, if you teach a numerical course, okay, if you refine your mesh, you see some order of convergence. But I can tell you, okay, we actually tried everything in the literature, try to reproduce. We have not found any paper we can reproduce. You can get asymptotics. You get flattened. If you increase number of neurons, your error will not decrease no matter how hard you work. You run your GPU for a couple of weeks, it still doesn't decrease. Okay, there may be some, you know, when I gave a talk, I don't know, it's still recorded, but I'm always asking my audience, okay, please, if you know, sometimes I call everybody because they have all this asymptotic, then I call, also, why you cannot see keep going down? Some of my good friends, oh, if you're going down, you get a flight. They stop there. but you know, if you go down here, but this is some theoretical things, yeah. But yeah, I think there's some progress in the last few months. But I don't know. I haven't. But anyway, but here we have what I call a greedy algorithm. But the greedy algorithm is, again, is in the approximation theorem community. It's been the actual statistician also use this a lot of time. So basically, if you do the gradient descent, for example, you want to go to the gradient direction, but right now it's in the dictionary direction. So you're looking for the dictionary direction in the which is kind of the closest to the gradient direction. If you do these things with anyway, this is a long story about the gradient. We spent a tremendous amount of time recently studying the gradient algorithm because that's the only method we found that actually give you a chance. And if we do that, if we just make the long story short, is the greedy algorithm is computable, but you have to solve this what we call the Argmax problem. But you remember this D is a fixed dictionary, and for dimension, this one is a kind of low dimensional, but still. And if you are able to solve this one, then I have a convergence estimate. It's n to the negative half. It turns out we actually recently we can even do a better. If you do the greedy algorithm, provided you can do the Argmax problem, you find the gradient direction in the approximate way in the dictionary, you can get this rate of convergence. So you can actually get the optimal neuron, they get the optimization by using this what they call a greedy algorithm. Every time you just add a neuron which go for this gradient direction correction. And let me see because I'm the time running out. But if you can do all kinds of theories, you do the analysis, and so you combine all this together, and so the greedy algorithm. There's easy. You do the Argmax here. If you do D equal to 1, this is a two-dimensional optimization algorithm, like the unit square. Here's the question. How do you find the global maximum for a smooth function in a unit square? Sounds like a very trivial question. But it turns out that I don't really know an algorithm which computationally get there. I get a unit cube that's in 3D. I give a very smooth function. So you have a code, apply your function, you get a global maximizer. So what I do is do a stupid method. I put a lot of mesh points. Then I do a Newton method. And of course, if you always find the stationary point. I go to the boundaries, how I teach my calculus course. But if you run into a computer, it turns out it's not a trivial problems. But I can do the brute force way, okay? There, I think I found a book. I think is that this book? There's some kind of probabilistic. When you go to this, you do probabilistic things, which I probably want to. I started probability when I was graduate, but somehow I don't use it very much. But anyway, this is still an interesting problem. Suppose you can do it. At least I can. I said earlier, okay, do a neural network for solving PDE. Just show me any method. I don't care. It takes days, or weeks, or months, or 100, 500 GPU you have here. You run all your GPU. I don't care how expensive you. Can you just get me something which is asymptotically good? And but here I have one. I don't know any other one. But maybe in the last couple of months, which I've been busy traveling. But let me show you the numerics. If you do the, I can do the first of you the data fitting. You can do L2. You can see all the asymptotic. I do brute force way. Okay, you can do the Archimedes problem, and you can see the grade. But if you do I can do the convergence. We can actually prove the orthogonal gradient method, and this you can do 1D. But if you do the other method, SGD, you get a stagnation. At some point, you just cannot improve anymore. But again, this maybe I didn't do the current my postdoc. I think they're pretty good, but we tune the code, you just don't get there. And again, I can get some help from the audience on this thing. But anyway, we recently made some progress with Schwartz method and all that sort of things. And I have even a theoretical proof. I don't think it's actually possible numerically, computationally, to get the rate of it's a terrible yield condition. And I recently proved something. Even for linear problem, you cannot really do it well. This is up for the 1D or 2D? Even 1D, I think. I think 1D or 2D, but just difficult. You cannot, if you increase the neurons, your SGD converges very slowly. But I can actually prove that you cannot do it basically. I have a theorem, computationally, but in this case, because it's a terrible yield condition, I'm running the time. I did all kinds of things, but if you do on the 2D, 1D, 2D, if you do a Stefan is there. I need your help to do it. If you do this Archimedes problems, I don't know. I have to talk to you, but you use like 1,000 GPU, maybe you can solve this high dimension problem. But anyway, now I just want to say this is a non-linear problem. I just want to say this is the so-called curse of the mediality. I give you a high dimensional problems. That's a Poisson equation. When you say your algorithm is no curse of dimensionality, it should satisfy at least the following two criteria. Number one is that if the dimension increases, your accuracy should not decrease very much, right? It should kind of stay. So d equal to 1 to d equal to 10, you should have the same kind of accuracy. That's number one. My second criteria as a mathematician is that if the resource is not a concern, if I increase the computational resource, your accuracy should get better. That makes this fair. That's my criteria. On these two criteria, I'm not talking about theory. I'm talking about empirical evidence. And I shouldn't really say that, but I'm just, it's okay to admit ignorance, but I just do not know convincing numerical evidence to actually support that statement, if even solving PDEs. But again, this I'm just relatively only very in the last couple of months, weeks actually getting into those high dimensional PDEs. But it turns out we are going to do the 10 dimensions. We get us forget about 256. If you solve a PDE of high order, do you have a convincing numerical evidence, computational feasible algorithm that solution of high dimension that has no curse of dimensionality? On the two conditions, the accuracy will not decrease when the dimension not decrease very much at least when you increase the size of dimension. Number two is that if you increase the computational resource, the accuracy will get better. So it should be numerical examples out there, but okay, I can give you one here.
This relates to the class of functions you have.
Exactly.
Mobility.
Yeah, exactly. That's. Thank you very much for coming. For example, I take a function which is a summation of one variable function, for example. Then I have a computational provable algorithm. My greedy algorithm works well. Again, thank you very much. If you have very specially structured function like this function, if I take a 10 to 100, I can compute it for you. It is a 10 dimension. But again, somehow you still need if it's additive separable, yeah. But they always say high dimensional problem. It's not really high dimension. There's a low dimensional manifold sitting there. And otherwise you can, if it's truly high dimension. And if you have a special class, a special structure, I just thank you again. You can do it. But here I can actually mathematically prove that you can only have to solve one-dimensional optimization problem by using this greedy. But if you do SGD, I believe it's going to be dead. It's going to be, and if you do SGD, it's not a special algorithm. It's a generic algorithm, and you won't get anywhere. But if you have special structure, but anyway, these are some things I'm trying to collect the data and trying to understand. There are lots of people, very good people, top people working in this business. But I'm relatively new to the high dimension problem. And wait a minute, maybe I'm wrapping up. I think I just want to conclude by saying that one of the things I said to begin with, that finite element, Relu DNA is just as a function class is the same as finite element, and you need for the theoretically have no curse of dimensionality. The function has to be very special, and finite neuron, it has a super approximation problem. It's very difficult to get them. And some people ask me, should I use the neural network function to solve PDE? My answer is no, don't use it. Okay? Not for low dimension problems. And now I think for high dimension problem, it's a big and open area. How do you do the optimization problem? Even the Monte Carlo, I'm glad to see you have this multi-level Monte Carlo. This variance or whatever things depend. Convergence depends on the variance. If you do the multi-level Monte Carlo, you can reduce the variance. But when you get a high dimension, even the Monte Carlo is a bottleneck. And but anyway, we don't have much good experience on this thing. But then you have to solve this optimization problem. You first have to have the sampling this. You have to do the numerical quadrature. Then you have to do the optimization. Optimization is a big nightmare. And but here we use some very special class of things called greedy algorithm. Again, we did not invent the algorithm ourselves, but we have better theoretical convergence analysis, and to be used in the numerical PDE. And by that, I should just conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very exciting talk. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just small comment on previous slide is Poisson problem in 10D or 100D.
10 dimension?
Yeah.
This is the one.
Poisson problem. I think.
Possible on what?
Yes, this one. No, next one.
This one?
Yeah, just wanted to say that tensor community, it's like testing problem for them. So many people try to solve this problem with tensor train methods and
so the
tensor methods are very efficient here.
Which one?
Tensor methods.
Oh yeah, tensor is fine.
Tensor.
Tensor, but again, you have it's like a high quality. All this did that. Yes, tensor. I'm talking about the neural network. Sorry, you're right. You can do also sparse grid or stuff like that. You have to have very special. Yes, I'm talking about just deep neural network. Yes, the tensor. I'm aware of this work. I should have
probably there are problems where tensor method doesn't work, but for this problem they're very good actually.
Oh, absolutely. Even for the neural network shallow, it works very well. But
I mean in high dimension, in 300 dimension, not only 10, but you can go up to 300.
Oh yeah, I've seen the work. I'm talking about. Are you aware of the deep neural network approach?
No, I'm not.
Yeah, but I'm talking about. Next time I'd be more careful. I'm just playing with deep neural network, which the tensor and all these things. I've been talking. Heiko has been working on this, for example. I actually I talk to him quite often. Yeah, there's a quite nice work in that category. Yeah, even the sparse grid you can also do quite well. Yeah, tensor certainly. Yeah, thank you.
Shihab, one second, Jim.
So when you compare to the SGD, so I heard that some people say that this plateau is due to noise. I mean that you have noise level. So we expect also that at pre-asymptotic that this kind of stochastic methods are much faster, but then they lose, I mean, that advantage asymptotically compared to your approach. I was not attentive at your plots. So, I mean, your method is also faster in the pre-asymptotic regime.
I wouldn't claim the speed because I don't have that domain. Computational resource is not quite an issue, but I can come to what you said a little bit earlier. The slowness of SG is not only because of the noise. And I can actually prove that the rate of convergence for even the full gradient, or forget about the generalization accuracy here. SGD has some argument to be made that this minimatch has some regularization effect. But here I'm not talking about machine learning. I'm talking about a single one PDE, so one guy. I think I was thinking, but in that case, I recently proved the result. If you have n neurons, the rate of convergence is 1 minus n to the negative 4. And I can prove even for a linear problem. If n is equal, if it's 1 million neurons, which is to have billions of neurons, you have 10 to the minus 24, 1 minus. And now you try to converge this thing, you need a few hundreds of thousands of years to get converged. And it's just not theoretically possible. Now computational resource become an issue. You cannot say you can do 100 years with a supercomputer. And so gradient descent method is a method that has no hope for asymptotics. But for machine learning, by the way, I mean, the bar is very low. You don't need accuracy. You don't even need a single procedure. They even use a half procedure or something. And but we're talking about numerical PDE. You want to arbitrary. It's a mathematical question which may or may not be liked by engineering practitioners. Why do I care? They only care about 10 to the minus 3. I call them. I got them. I accuracy 10 to the minus 3. That's how they competed with these days. So what the heck does 10 to the minus 3 means? but they know, but I don't, because for engineering problem, 10 to the minus 3 is good. But anyway, but from 10 to the minus 3 to 10 to the minus 4 is a big deal these days. And in some literature at least.
Thank you for the nice talk. So I have a couple of questions. So first, it is indeed very difficult to solve these optimization problems.
Yeah.
So some people actually give up on solving the problem. For instance, for say, single layer, they say, okay, if you think of the amplitudes and sort of the frequency, the part that becomes non-linearly in the activation function, you say, I'm going to solve linearly for the amplitude and sample the frequency. Okay, the first talk by Anders Sepesi in this meeting was about the random features and how to do a Markov-Chain Monte Carlo method on the frequency space to avoid entirely the optimization. And I think Aku Kamone has a poster on these two. So one can try to avoid essentially the global optimization problem, trying to go to a sort of sampling type of method.
Just wait. Sorry. Okay. I'm going to have to go to the medical test.
Yes,
we are waiting on you. You have 5 passport.
Okay, sorry. I'm still in the talk. I'm sorry. I'm saying I'm coming out. Okay.
Don't worry. We can follow up. But I mean, that was the thing that I wanted to say. Not everything is about optimization. One can try to avoid optimization with respect to the really bad part of the model and try to use sampling instead. And that seems to work quite well, actually.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Well, I'm here for. I want to.
Because it's like a hybrid method, right? I mean, linear on one part, then you solve it directly without optimization, and the other part you use sampling.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
So Aku is.
I would love to talk to you guys about this. Because I address this because yes, I actually think maybe we should give up the optimization problem. I was a little bit afraid to say that because it's just it's impossible. I think. And it's really very highly.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I answered that's my wife's call. Yeah.
So thank you very much again. Thank you.
I'm going to run to I have a medical test.
And we meet again in the afternoon.
On a different place. Please check the agenda. It's not here. It's somewhere else. I don't remember. But that's why the agenda is here for you. We'll check the agenda.